What if one of the most successful operations of the Second World War began with a mistake? What if, within minutes of reaching the coast of Normandy, American commanders realized that months of meticulous planning no longer matched the battlefield in front of them? History often celebrates Operation Overlord as a triumph of preparation, logistics, and overwhelming Allied strength. Yet one of its most important moments was not written into any invasion order. It emerged from uncertainty, incomplete information, and the willingness of a commander to make a critical decision before anyone outside the beachhead even knew there was a problem. This is not simply the story of Utah Beach. It is the story of how military plans meet reality, and why successful commanders are often remembered not because everything went according to plan, but because they knew when the plan no longer applied. By the spring of 1944, Allied planners had devoted enormous resources to designing the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Every landing beach had been studied through aerial photography, intelligence reports, tidal analysis, and countless rehearsals. Utah Beach, located on the western flank of the Normandy invasion area, appeared to offer advantages that some of the other landing sites lacked. The terrain sloped gradually toward the sea, and the beaches were wider than those beneath the cliffs farther east. But appearances were deceptive. German engineers, acting under broader defensive efforts to strengthen what became known as the Atlantic Wall, had flooded much of the low-lying countryside behind the beaches. These artificial marshes reduced the number of practical routes inland, forcing any invading force toward a limited number of raised roads and causeways. Capturing those exits quickly was considered essential. Without them, thousands of soldiers, vehicles, and supplies could become trapped on the shoreline. The American landing force assigned to Utah Beach prepared accordingly. Naval gunfire, aerial bombardment, specialized engineer teams, amphibious vehicles, and infantry formations were synchronized into an intricate sequence designed to overwhelm local defenses before German commanders could react. Months of planning emphasized coordination above all else. Every unit had a designated landing sector. Every engineer team knew which obstacles it was expected to clear. Every supporting element was assigned a timetable measured in minutes rather than hours. The assumption underlying the entire operation was straightforward if each component arrived at approximately the right place and approximately the right time. Momentum would carry the invasion forward before the defenders could organize an effective response. Yet military history repeatedly demonstrates that carefully designed plans rarely survive unchanged once combat begins. Weather, smoke, currents, communication failures, and human judgment all introduce uncertainty that no planning staff can eliminate completely. The Normandy landings would prove no exception. During the early hours of June 6, 1944, the invasion fleet crossed the English Channel under difficult conditions. Heavy seas, limited visibility, and the complexity of coordinating thousands of ships created challenges that extended far beyond the experience of any previous amphibious operation. As the assault waves approached Utah Beach, navigation became increasingly difficult. Strong currents affected the movement of landing craft, while smoke from naval bombardment further complicated visual identification of landmarks along the coast. By the time the first American troops began moving toward shore, many of the assumptions built into the original landing plan were already under pressure. Among the senior officers arriving with the firstest all elements was Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. At 50-6 years old, Roosevelt was considerably older than many of the men under his command and had persistent health problems, including arthritis that required him to use a cane. Despite these limitations, he had insisted on accompanying the opening assault, believing that senior leadership on the beach would help maintain organization during one of the most dangerous phases of the invasion. As American forces moved inland from the surf, it became increasingly clear that something was wrong. Officers searched for landmarks identified during months of planning but struggled to match them with the landscape before them. The expected exits from the beach were not immediately visible, and reports from subordinate units suggested that formations had landed south of their intended positions. Although historians continue to debate the precise combination of navigational factors involved, the broad conclusion is well established: the leading elements had not arrived exactly where planners expected them to be. At that moment, Roosevelt faced a challenge familiar to commanders throughout history. The written plan represented months of analysis and coordination. Every supporting element had been organized around it. Yet the battlefield itself was presenting different conditions. Continuing to pursue the original scheme exactly as written could require exposing troops to additional movement along an unfamiliar shoreline while delaying the broader advance inland. On the other hand, abandoning the plan carried its own risks. The surrounding terrain had not been selected through the same careful process. Intelligence on nearby German positions remained incomplete. and any decision would affect not only the soldiers already ashore, but also the additional waves still approaching from the sea, rather than assuming that the original plan remained correct simply because it had been approved in advance. Roosevelt and other officers evaluated the immediate conditions around them. Reports from frontline units indicated that German resistance in their immediate landing area appeared lighter than expected. Engineers identified routes that could potentially serve as exits from the beach. Most importantly, time was becoming the decisive factor. Every minute spent reorganizing on the shoreline increased vulnerability, while every minute gained moving inland improved the chances of establishing a secure beachhead before German reinforcements could arrive. The decision that followed has become one of the most discussed episodes associated with Utah Beach. Instead of attempting to relocate the entire landing force to its originally planned position, Roosevelt chose to continue the advance from where the troops had actually landed. Later recollections famously summarized this choice with the remark that the war would begin from the location where they stood, whether quoted exactly or remembered through later accounts. The broader significance of the decision remains clear. Rather than treating the landing error as a disaster requiring immediate correction, Roosevelt treated the existing situation as the new operational reality. That distinction reflected an important principle of military leadership. Plans exist to achieve objectives, not to become objectives themselves. Once circumstances change, effective commanders must determine whether preserving the original plan still serves the mission or whether adapting to new conditions offers a greater chance of success. At Utah Beach, the objective had always been to establish a secure foothold and move inland. The precise landing coordinates mattered only insofar as they supported that larger purpose. As additional American units continued arriving throughout the morning, the beachhead gradually expanded. Engineers worked to clear obstacles, infantry advanced toward inland routes, and communications with naval forces improved. What had initially appeared to be a potentially serious navigational problem increasingly became part of a broader operational success. Yet at the time, none of the participants could know how events would unfold over the following hours. Their decisions were made without the benefit of hindsight, relying instead on incomplete information, professional judgment, and an understanding that hesitation itself could become the greatest danger. Part 2. Parwin. As the morning progressed, the consequences of that decision became increasingly apparent. Instead of losing valuable hours attempting to reposition an entire assault force, American units continued pressing inland, securing routes beyond the beach and expanding the landing area before German commanders could coordinate a response. The initial confusion did not disappear overnight, but momentum, a critical element in every amphibious invasion, was preserved. In military operations, momentum often matters as much as firepower. Once it is lost, even a numerically superior force can become vulnerable. At Utah Beach, maintaining forward movement proved far more valuable than achieving perfect alignment with the original invasion map. Historians continue to debate how much of Utah Beach's comparatively lower casualty rate resulted from planning, how much resulted from German dispositions, and how much resulted from simple chance. Several factors likely contributed simultaneously. German forces responsible for the sector were dispersed across a wide defensive area. Airborne operations conducted during the night created uncertainty behind the front, complicating communications and delaying situational awareness. Allied naval gunfire and dare attacks also disrupted portions of the German defensive network, even where they did not destroy every fortified position. No single explanation fully accounts for the outcome. Instead, Utah Beach illustrates how success in warfare often emerges from the interaction of preparation, adaptation, and circumstance rather than from any one decisive factor alone. The contrast with neighboring landing sectors highlights this point even more clearly. On other beaches, particularly Omaha, Allied troops encountered far stronger resistance and suffered significantly heavier casualties during the opening hours of the invasion. There, carefully prepared plans quickly collided with unexpectedly resilient defenses, difficult terrain, and intense fire from elevated German positions. Those experiences remind us that even within the same operation, conditions could differ dramatically over only a few miles of coastline. Deminus Day was not one uniform battle, but a collection of interconnected engagements, each shaped by its own geography, intelligence picture, and local command decisions. Roosevelt's leadership has often been remembered because it demonstrated an essential quality shared by many successful commanders throughout history: the ability to distinguish between changing the plan and abandoning the mission. Those are not the same thing. Military organizations invest enormous effort in planning because preparation reduces uncertainty. Yet no amount of planning can eliminate uncertainty entirely. Once events unfold, leaders must constantly compare expectations with reality. When those begin to diverge, rigid adherence to outdated assumptions can become more dangerous than thoughtful adaptation. This lesson extends far beyond the beaches of Normandy. Modern military doctrine increasingly emphasizes flexibility, decentralized decision-making, and mission-oriented command precisely because battlefield conditions evolve faster than centralized headquarters can often react. Technology has transformed communications and intelligence since 1944, but it has not eliminated uncertainty. Weather still changes, equipment still fails, information remains incomplete. Opponents still behave in unexpected ways. The commander who can rapidly interpret changing conditions often gains an advantage that no written plan can provide. The Normandy invasion itself reflected this broader truth. Operation Overlord succeeded not because every element unfolded exactly as planners envisioned months earlier, but because thousands of individuals from senior commanders to junior officers, engineers, naval crews, pilots, and infantrymen continued adapting as new challenges emerged throughout the campaign. Logistics had to adjust continuously. Beach exits had to be cleared under combat conditions. Temporary ports, supply depots, and transportation networks expanded almost immediately after the landings. Every successful phase of the operation required organizations capable of solving problems that had not existed when the original plans were drafted. Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, it is tempting to view D-Day as an inevitable Allied victory. History, however, rarely feels inevitable to those living through it. During the early hours of June 6th, uncertainty dominated nearly every level of command. Reports arrived slowly. Communications were imperfect. Individual commanders understood only fragments of the larger picture. Decisions had to be made before complete information became available. That reality makes Roosevelt's actions noteworthy not because they were dramatic, but because they reflected disciplined judgment under conditions where certainty simply did not exist. Ultimately, the story of Utah Beach is not primarily about a navigational error. It is about the relationship between planning and leadership. Preparation created the foundation for success, but preparation alone was never enough. The battlefield demanded something different: the willingness to recognize reality as it existed rather than as it had been expected to exist. In that sense, one of the most enduring lessons of June 6, 1944, is remarkably timeless. Victory often belongs not to the side with the most detailed plan, but to the side capable of adapting that plan without losing sight of its larger objective. At Utah Beach, the invasion did not succeed because every step unfolded exactly as intended. It succeeded because experienced leaders recognized that circumstances had changed, acted decisively within those new conditions, and transformed an unexpected challenge into an opportunity to gain the momentum that would ultimately help establish the Allied foothold in Western Europe.